Welcome to Leading Church with Pastor Steve Kelly. We're aiming to create a space to talk through issues that all leaders in ministry face. We want to do it in authentic and transparent conversation that helps you as a leader feel connected and not alone. Our guest today is Pastor Steve Kennedy, who's a pastor who's planted churches, led churches, and now he goes out to remote areas where churches are in need of encouragement and inspiration, and he preaches out there to them. You're going to love some of the stories and the messages he's got with us today. Well, hi, Pastor Steve. We are here today with Steve Kennedy, one of the great friends of our collective, who is here in America from Australia and going to be visiting a whole bunch of churches in the next little while. And so we thought we'd get a hold of him, and we wanted to drill down into his life and some of the things he's found, truth, and how to work life well.
Well, and before we even get started on this whole story, which I'm looking forward to hearing from Steve, Steve is been a dear friend of mine for I don't know how many years now, but we've known of each other.
Yeah.
We had an identity crisis in Australia.
Well, I was going to say that because when I was putting this all together, it's like Steve and Steve and Steve. There's so many Steves in this story.
His pastor in Australia was Steve Kennedy,
Yeah.
Steve Penny,
and Steve Kennedy, and then Steve Kelly, and all three were nationally known speakers, and we used to get confused each other all the time.
They introduced us as each other.
They did.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I've spoken in places that I know not of. But having said that, Steve's been coming out to Wave Church.
That's right.
To speak for us for the last, how many years, Steve?
13.
13 years.
Wow.
And how we actually became friends was over my cell phone, or your cell phone.
Both.
Cover had a Harley Davidson cover.
Correct.
And I was speaking at a conference
Correct.
in Australia, and I went, "Do you ride motorcycles?" And he goes, "Does a dog poop? No, does a bear,
poop in the woods."
poop in the woods?"
Yeah.
And we always knew of each other and knew each other and saw each other, but that was a moment we really connected. So I said, "Oh, Steve, come out. I want him to come and speak in our church." He's one of the best communicators. He's very intelligent, very street smart, and just hilarious.
Has a great message, but very, very funny.
Very
As you're
funny.
laughing, and then you just deliver that point, and just the Holy Spirit.
I'm not
just
kidding
works.
you. Like
That's
he's
true.
here doing our men's retreat now, and then every last 13 years we've rode motorcycles out to the Tail of the Dragon, and our guys love Steve Kennedy. He's probably the most popular person on the motorcycle trip. Is he coming next year? Is he coming next year? And we've just been good friends ever since, haven't we?
Yeah.
Well, you might notice that his accent is a little thicker than ours, because he is from Queensland in Australia, where they are renowned to know they actually have a far more, rural, perhaps.
Eloquent.
And I wouldn't have said eloquent. How would you say it, Steve Kennedy?
Well, when they were looking for the English language that could be universal
They did not
for
get
Siri,
They chose an
Australian, and from Queensland, Toowoomba, in fact.
Toowoomba.
Toowoomba.
That's Siri.
An immigrant from the UK. So, Steve, we're going to talk today, Steve Kennedy, we're going to talk to you today about your life and about some of the transitions you've done in your life. You've been involved in two churches, and in terms of leading two churches, and you've transitioned them well. And a lot of people, I think, Steve, are involved in transitions at various times in their life, especially senior ministers, which is a lot of our audience are people that have been on church leadership, and they have to transition. And you've done that.
Well, and see, we've seen so many train wrecks of people not handling that well.
That is so true.
And when I look at Steve's life and the amount of transitions that he has undergone, and each of them, maybe some of them, we're looking forward to hearing these stories, probably was not the best, but how he managed that and just the wisdom we're going to get from Steve today is why we're doing the podcast.
That's so true. So true. We've been talking out the back already, and so we've had some good laughs together, so we're really excited about sharing a lot of these thoughts with our audience today, and I think you're going to really enjoy meeting Steve Kennedy here. So, Steve, tell us about your early days. Obviously, you were born at a very young age in Brisbane, in Australia. Tell us about you growing up.
I'm one of 12 kids. my mum had
Only 12.
12 kids in 16 years.
It's very biblical.
I'm the seventh of those 12, so I have 7 sisters and 4 brothers.
Wow.
Dad was an AG pastor, Pentecostal pastor. He'd come from a mainline background, got filled with the Holy Ghost and asked to leave the mainline Bible college, so he became eventually an AG pastor. Now, what I'm about to say now is simply history. No hurt, no malice. I've had that, but not now. Dad left my mum with 11 of her 12 kids at home.
Wow.
He ran off, as we say, with a lady in the church.
Wow.
I was between the age of 10 and 13, so he was going longer, till when I was about 13, I asked my mum, "Where's Dad?" And I'm 13. She said, "I don't think he loves us anymore."
Oh, wow.
And that's...
Gosh.
yeah, my world sort of imploded for a couple of years then as that realisation hit me.
Were you a Christian then?
Well, I was 13, but I excelled in school. I went to school...
Oh, of course, your dad was a pastor.
Yeah, I went to school in an era when they told you where you came in the class. I don't even know, but I was always first.
Yeah.
Wow.
But no one tells you this, and it would be great if an adult had helped me, but my life just... I failed everything after that. Not just
wow.
school, everything in life.
Wow.
I just failed and could not articulate why. When I was 14, which is not long, but in terms of... But I was simply in my bed and I just felt my whole room spinning. I don't think it did spin, but it felt like it was. I don't think I got on the floor on my knees, but as I'm recounting it, I did. So it felt like I did. Surrendered my life to Jesus. It was that simple.
With no one else, no one leading you in that?
No, I'd been to church on that Sunday night, and the preacher in those days, they sang "Just As I Am" without one plea, as they did every week.
As they did.
And
Every week.
pointed his finger all over the
100
audience.
times.
There's
Yeah.
someone here. And so it was me, but it was a lot of people. But no, I was 14, and the miracle of it for me is I went to school the next day, changed all my friends, and I needed to change all my friends.
Wow.
And confessed Christ and have done ever since.
Wow. So you grew up then as a Christian, going to church.
Correct.
And then at some point you ended up in a church where Pastor Steve Penny, that's where we're coming into these.
The three Steves.
The three Steves. So
Correct.
Steve
Three
Penny,
amigos.
Again, many of the people who are in our listeners probably know Steve Penny. He's a great preacher. And he came in as the youth pastor in that church.
Yeah, when Dad exited the scene, my mum, obviously, I'm saying this as an adult, but she was just out to sea, with 11 children. So she decided to park in what was the Mecca of our movement of churches in those days. It was called Glad Tidings Tabernacle.
Right.
And so we were there.
Great history.
And Steve
church.
Penny was in town. He'd just returned from Vietnam, actually. Steve's a vet. And respected in that regard, among other things. So he'd just come back from Vietnam, had entered Bible college, and was the youth pastor. The first conversation he ever had with me was he caught me stealing biscuits out of the church kitchen.
Cookies.
Cookies, yes.
Yeah, cookies. And he said, "If I catch you stealing biscuits again, I'm going to kick your butt round the block."
Now, he was an MP.
He was a military policeman, so no one liked him.
Yes.
But that's where I was introduced to him. I don't believe there would have been a program to it, but again, my articulations are from an adult going backwards, and I just think he took it. Holy Spirit, I don't know. It was organic. I don't think program.
Because he's played a major part in your life, and we'll unpack that.
He just took me to everything. Took me to car shows, football, bought me my first motorcycle. I remember him coming over to my home, and who could do this as a youth pastor, and talking my mother in to allowing me to have a racing motorcycle.
Wow.
A full competition motorcycle. And I'm
was
15.
Was he then, when you look back on this, was he playing the role of a youth pastor that was very caring, or was he also playing the role fatherly?
I don't know that...
Not that he was trying to be your dad.
No. I don't believe he would have been thinking... Well, look, James 1:27 says, true religion, pure, undefiled before God, visit the fatherless and the orphans in their affliction. So he simply didn't stand at the side. He got involved.
Wow.
I don't know that it was programmatic. I just think organically,
Right.
I was in the youth group. I think I was a willing learner. I think I was a good student because I've often complimented him over now 50 years this year. He's been my pastor.
50 years.
Yeah. And I've often said, you've been very good to me. He said, can't be a good teacher if you don't have a good student.
Yeah.
So I own that now. I did chase
Yeah.
and still chase. But so I just became his shadow.
Right.
I think that's an important thing to just talk about. So you said you chased him,
Still do.
and that's my one I get to. And here you are yourself now,
63.
63, and you still pursue. I know you'll get on your motorcycle and ride how far?
90 minutes.
90 minutes.
Once a month
Once a month.
to have breakfast
Just to
with
have
him
breakfast with him
when he can fit it in.
around his schedule.
Yeah. He does not ring me.
You're in. He does, but it's up to you.
He does not ring me.
You're the initiator.
He returns my calls if I ring and miss him. And I'm huge on this. I believe sons chase fathers.
Yeah.
I have a lot of guys talk about where are the fathers. I say, where are the sons?
Yeah, but you're a father now. But you still are a son. He's still your father.
Oh, absolutely.
I love that. I think that's an important thing to bring out.
Sure. I've got the next generation doing it to me now.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, I'm a firm believer in that, and I wouldn't go to a church if the pastor could not tell me the
Yes.
name of his pastor
Very
or
good.
her pastor.
Yeah.
Everyone's trying to get to the top of the tree, but I think I tell God, if you think you're on the top of the tree, mate, take one more step. It's the pavement.
Very good.
Yeah.
And I've often, through my 50 years of following Steve, and there are others, Pastor Steve, you across the room have become a clear part of my apostolic covering, as I call it. But in chasing Steve Penny, I would say I've got to his level many times, but he's never there when I get there.
Right.
So I keep chasing.
Yeah, that's good.
So I do understand that you may surpass a father, and then but I've been very fortunate that my father has stayed ahead of me. I want to make one other point on there. See, I believe fathers chase sons, like the prodigal. I don't call it the prodigal son; it's a bad name. But Luke 15, the father ran.
Yeah.
There's a time when the son is in so much trouble that the father must come, and I've seen that unfortunately not taken place when it should have.
Yeah.
But I think on the whole, sons, we're being generic, daughters.
Yeah.
Like I'm the bride of Christ, so the ladies are the sons of God. So we're
Yeah.
talking spirit terms here. Sons chase fathers.
Wow.
I have guys say, well, I rang him and he didn't answer. So what do you think he's doing, mate? Sitting around waiting for you to call him.
Yeah.
I'm glad my pastor hasn't got time to call me back all the time. He's out there.
Yeah.
I chase.
Yeah. That's good.
What would either of you two say? Like if someone's out there, they've just heard you say, Steve, who's your pastor? And you've hit something in them. How would someone, what are they looking for when they're looking for a pastor? I know, for Steve and I, I've seen Steve as my pastor, for years, and longer than I care to
admit.
to admit, just for my own sake, my own age, but my own vanity, I guess. But there are people out there who are doing it all alone, and I've seen that. You've seen that. What would you say?
Proverbs
How do you
18,
get one?
Proverbs 18:1. He who isolates himself seeks his own desire and rages against all wisdom. So, you can be part of a denomination and you still don't have a pastor.
No.
You might have structural hierarchical oversight, but who's your pastor?
Yeah.
Who is it? If you're in trouble, who are you going to call? Do you know what I mean? Who is that person? And don't wait till you're in trouble. Be calling them long before you're in trouble, so there isn't trouble.
Yep.
So who is your pastor? Who are you? Who can say no to you?
Yep.
Who can challenge you? Who can push back on you? Because when you're the pastor of a church, you've got people that you lead, but the only power of your leadership is the amount of authority you're also under.
And who can change your diary? There has to be someone in your life
schedule.
who can change your calendar.
Yeah.
I ring my pastor, and to the world, I'm fantastic. I had a realtor ring me yesterday, manages a property I have, and she didn't know I was overseas. She said, I didn't want to ring you because, I know you're going overseas soon, so I didn't tell her. Anyway, she said, how are you? I said, I feel fantastic. She said, I like talking to you. You're always fantastic. Well, the truth is I'm not. but to the world I am. But when I ring pastor, he says, "How you going?" I said, and I'd just tell him.
Yeah.
And I remember one time saying, "Look, Steve," this is Steve Penny. I said, "I don't want to make you my wailing wall." And just straight down the phone, "That's what fathers are for."
Yeah.
And then I said, "Well, I don't talk to everyone like this." He said, "And that's why I listen."
Yes.
So, look, if you're going to whinge to everybody, you're not going to attract the right ear.
Yeah.
Right.
But, you know, if you know where to and where not to bleed.
So what are you looking for? So someone out there wants to find a pastor. What would you say? They're a leader. They're in a big church.
Well, it's got to be mutual. It's like you were saying. It's like, you know, I don't know that, you know, who chooses who first, but I would think it's the dad that would see something in the son, and maybe the son saw the dad first. So I don't know that that's necessary.
Well, I was too young for any of that. Mine was just too organic. It had to have come from the father.
Yeah.
So would you say more than likely that person is already in your world?
Yeah, and Mark, I think an important point to make is that I think we see utopia. And it's not that these relationships don't present themselves. Look, you can't say that in 50 years of Steve Penny being my pastor, a military policeman from Vietnam, that I haven't had opportunity to say, "I'm 55 years old, why do I have to keep doing this?" Or "I'm 48 years old." I've had those times. But I've had to go home and in the cold light of day say, well, if I stop ringing him, how does that affect his life? Well, it doesn't. So I've realised, well, it's going to affect mine. So I've had to...
And I think the level of conversations and questions are different now because you're a grown man.
Yeah.
Correct.
Do you know what I mean? So it I think we're not trying to keep this in a simplistic, you're always needing him to tell you what to do, but you're running things by him, right?
Sure. Well, just recently, and, you know, I, with no uncovering my father's nakedness here, but he'll hear this, he'll go for everything I'm saying. He said to me recently, because we talk, you know, he said, "Oh, you don't listen to me." I said, "Steve, don't mistake not listening for not doing."
Right. Yeah, that's good.
I am 62 years old.
Yeah.
I listen to everything you say.
Yeah.
I internalise everything you say. I take feedback from other people on everything you say.
Yep.
And then sometimes I don't do it.
Yeah.
But please don't think I don't listen.
What did he
because
say
I
to
most
that?
certainly, he's brilliant. He said, "Good call."
Okay.
Yeah. So let's go back to where we're at in terms of the story. You're a young man, and at one point Steve Penny goes off to another church and so on, leaves you, and then returns back into the Brisbane area, into a poor socioeconomic area, and wants to plant a church.
Okay.
What happens?
All right, Steve, I meet him at 13. He goes off to help his father, in fact, build a church in another city thousands of miles away in Australia. I said to Susie, my wife, I got married at 18, and I'm 45 years this year. Wow. And I said to Susie when he went, I said, "I don't know why I say this. I'm 18. I said, I think I'll work for Steve Penny one day." It's ridiculous.
Right.
And funny enough, when he left, because we were close, as you know, a youth pastor and a kid would be, he wrote me a letter. Because, again, nothing electronic in those days. And he simply said, "Never settle down." It's because I was getting married. He was gone when I got married. Well, 2 years later, he came back, having finished the project with his father, and he decided to plant a church. I was totally planted in the church,
right?
But he's my pastor, and I said, "I'm coming," to which he said, "No, no." I keep going into his voice, so I'll use mine.
I did notice
He said,
that.
"No, you can't." And I thought, that is a real good way to build a brand new church. But he said to me, "You get a word from God, or you stay exactly where you are."
Right.
And I tell you, I had no clue what he meant. I was a bit like Samuel. I was in the temple, but had never heard the voice of the Lord.
That is so counterculture to at least for people listening to this podcast
so
in
true.
America. We'll prophesy over people to get them to come that are in other churches. Well, faith without hints is
That's
dead.
right. Social media.
Social media.
We'll
but
pay you.
That's. I mean, what you just said there's big.
Well, my pastor's never moved an inch off that philosophy.
Yeah.
Look, he's known as a prophet. I prophesy. He's a prophet.
Yeah.
I'm an evangelist. But he said, so look, I got my first word. I look back on it these days, it's very flimsy.
Right.
But he said, that'll do. So I went. Look, it was only 3 weeks into it that I realised why it was important. Because you start a church plant and it's in a school hall.
Yeah.
We pack up. He says, what are you doing?
It's a very different day back then when you.
Oh, it was a very different day back then. It was, one acoustic guitar and, that was it. We knew 6 people were coming. 26 turned up.
Yeah.
I pack in chairs afterwards because I just said, I'll do anything. I'm 20 years of age. And he said, what are you doing? I said, nothing. He said, well, come on over for dinner. And I thought, oh, wow, I'm going to pastor's house. And so second week, I'm packing chairs. He came to see me. What are you doing after? I said, nothing. And he said, come on over. I said, oh, this is cool. So the next week, I'm dressed. I got the cooler in the car. I'm taking food. And I saw him drive off.
That's good.
That's when I knew, because I'd left 8 siblings.
Right.
I'm 20. I've left 8 siblings, 10 years of my life, in that church, all with the insecurities of getting there with my family blown to bits. My dad had raised people from the dead. My dad was a player in terms of, he was known. And now all of a sudden, the utopia I thought I'd come to is just drove down the street.
Right.
And I'm still stacking up the chairs. That's the day I realised why I needed a word from God.
Yeah.
And I stayed there 27 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
With a brief interlude, which may or may not come up.
So that church, you actually left that church. You returned back to your other church while Steve Penny was still building that church.
Yeah.
Because he said, okay, the job's done as youth pastor, and now you're going to go on as associate somewhere else.
Steve always said, look, if I can't replace you, I can't promote you. If you're going to hold on. So when he employed somebody. Now, I was just stacking out chairs. I was a steel construction worker back in those days.
Yeah.
We call it a boilermaker, welder, all that, shipbuilder. And but when he put me on as the youth pastor a couple years later, he said, I have not employed you to do a job. I've employed you to do yourself out of a job.
Yep.
It was always the way he worked. I would say Steve had a succession culture, which may not be today's topic, but as Tacita thought, totally different to a succession plan, which I find go wrong sometimes.
Yeah.
But so I went to see him after 9 years and said, I don't have a job anymore. He said, why not? I said, because I've employed this other fellow in the youth. He's not as good as me yet, but his line is so upward trending. Mine's about to plateau. And I was his associate pastor by now. I said, you told me to do myself out of a job. I've done that. But I said, but tell me not to leave, and I won't, because I'm not an evangelist, I'm not a prophet, I'm called to you. And to my horror, he said, no, you can go.
Not the news you sort of thought you were going to hear.
Well, he did say, then what are you going to do? I said, I don't know, but I had received an offer from the church I'd left as a kid to come back and be the associate.
Okay.
And he said, well, what about that offer And I said, well, why do I want to go there? And he just looked me square in the eye and said, oh, so you have other offers. I said, that's a good point. So I went back and took that role.
Right. And you were there for 2 years?
Pastor wanted me to sign on for 5 years. He had a very clear vision. I said, I can't do that. This sounds a bit uppity, but I said to him, look, I've done my apprenticeship. I don't think you even want a subordinate. He said, I definitely do not. I said, but I will kill for you if God tells me to come here. Because, see, submission is not agreement. A lot of people work together because they agree.
Right.
Submission is totally different to
Yeah.
that. So say, God calls me here, I'm your man.
Right.
And said, but I'll give you 2 years. And he said, well, what will you do after 2? Will you have an option? And I said, well, if after 2 God has not spoken to me clearly, I'll plant a church because I won't die wondering. I knew that I could do that.
Right.
But of course, Mark, when I took that church on, Pastor Steve, I took that church on within, look, I'm saying a month or two, but I'm sketchy there. He got very sick, and he remained sick for 20 years, to be honest. But he made a decision to convalesce back in his home country of England. Now, this is a totally non-electronic era.
Right.
And so...
We're talking a long time ago.
Yeah, this is the late 80s. And so I remember looking, I was about 27, 28. I said, look, I'm all for it, but just go and get well. Don't ring us. Don't write us a letter. Just get well.
And you're the associate pastor.
I was employed as the associate pastor.
Like the second in charge.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And look, and while he was away, the church blew up.
Yeah.
And I'm not taking credit for that because he had some he got some momentum, but certainly didn't drop off. It just blew up. It was going. And so coming 18 months later, Steve Penny rang me and said, I'd like you to consider taking the church on. And
This is the one back in Logan that Steve Penny planted.
Yeah, the church I had been in. So I'd come from this church, planted that church, come back to this church. Now I'm being asked to go back to that church.
Wow.
And look, sitting here today, it looks so hand of God because I was the youth pastor. And, you know, I didn't have to...
So people had to see you in a different light.
Yeah, I didn't have to shake that off there.
Sure.
It was like I'd done my university.
Yeah.
Now I'd been sent off to postgrad.
Gotcha. Yeah, makes sense.
But a more important thing, Steve Penny is an uncopyable leader.
Right.
You know, there are those types of leaders, they're brilliant, but they're not copyable. C.M. Ward comes to mind, famous guy from here, not a copyable leader. But he was my dad, and so sons try to be like their dads. When I went to the other church, the pastor there was, correct me if this is not the right word, Mark, but he was the antithesis of that. He was 5'2", he was 100 pounds wet, and he was the politician leader that he shot from the shadows. Everyone sort of knew he did the shooting, but he could never be charged.
Right.
Where Steve Penny would just shoot you right in the face.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what it did for me, I think if I'd have taken the church on straight from pastor, I think I'd have had a very difficult 5 years.
Sure.
But going there, I had this epiphany. There's more than one way. And it helped me to see, well, there may be actually more than two ways. There could be a third way.
Yep.
And I think I was afforded a wonderful opportunity to come in to pastor that church, having had great experience. And look, again, of course, it was all news to me. I have a feeling, because my pastor's a prophet, that he could see that all along. I think when I went to that other church, he knew in his heart, now that I think of it, that he's the guy I'm having back. I was his son.
Yeah.
And I was not just his son, but I was God's called.
I mean, it is incredible to watch God's hand in all that. When you first started out as the associate, similar thing happened to you, Steve, where the pastor got sick. You didn't necessarily have any. At least his was coming back. You weren't sure. I'm wondering how you cope in that situation. You take it on. How do you make sure that you don't take over?
Well, my big goal in that time that he had a breakdown, that was over 3 years. And I think for over those 3 years, for at least 9 months, I was the acting
right. And the church exploded,
senior pastor,
similar to what Steve Kennedy's saying.
And of course, when you're having a breakdown and his house was across the road from the church, and he could see the parking lot,
The momentum.
fuller, all the rest of it. And all I ever wanted to do was giving back the church. I wanted my dad back. I wanted my pastor back. I wanted to give him something that was bigger and healthier. Or at least we didn't lose ground. Do you know what I mean? But fortunately, things were happening. But I thought about that for him. How would that make him feel? Do you know what I mean? So I tried to, but long story cut short, when he did come back, he still wasn't well, and he was having breakdowns. And so I remember saying to him, listen, I know you think the church is going to be smaller. I know you think the church is in recession. But what he was doing was trying to bring the church back to what he could cope
So
with.
you could manage, yeah.
You know what I mean? Which I understood that. And I realized I can no longer serve this man, but I must honor him. And I remember I said, look, I think the best thing for me to do was to move on. The best way I know how to be loyal is to move on. And he said, yeah, I agree. And I wasn't shocked he said that.
Wow.
And so long story cut short, that night, one of the key elders came over to my house and said, listen, we hear you resigned. I said, yeah. They said, if you stay, we'll fire the senior pastor and give you the church. And that's the night I realized. I went, how dare you?
Yeah.
You
A lot
go-
of people would have went, hallelujah, this is the will of the Lord.
Like to me, I just thought about David and Saul and, you know, I just went, there's no way I would, you know, the Bible says David's conscience smote him when he cut off the corner of Saul's robe, let alone take him out. And I just went, I'm not going to, this is not, God put him here. And it'll be God that removes him, not an elder because he likes the young guy. And I said, but I will be telling the senior pastor what you told me. And I did. And then I went over, transition to be part, and I remember I was going to go to America saying I was going to plant a church. And I said, but I want to just kind of really take some time to heal over that whole experience and really, frankly, learn some new skills. And so I thought I'm going to start attending what we now know as Hillsong Church. And back in those days, it wasn't called that. And I remember ringing Pastor Brian Houston up, saying, like, you'll send me in church on Sunday and everything's good. I've just stepped down from being the associate pastor. And I got my old job back working for Radio Reynolds, an installer technician. Got it the same day from 8 years earlier than when I was employed. And I rang my old boss and he hired me that day. And so then I got a phone call from Mike Murphy. Says, Brian wants to know, would you pray about running the college? And I went, me running a Bible college? And so I said, I'll come for 2 years. And then after that, I'm going to America and was going to plant a church. Of course, 8 years later, I'm still there, and I ended up being the 2IC of Hillsong. But there are wonderful things to learn about. It's just a test of your,
real
character, your motive, your integrity, isn't it?
Well, there's many things to learn inside. I'm thinking of this while you say it, so I'm going to offer it here. I think what you have to learn to do, because it's often not you, it's the helpers that try to plant a bad spirit in you by saying, gee, you're doing a good job.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yes.
But I've learned that you should never defend your leader.
Yeah.
You should represent your leader.
Very
good.
Very good.
Yeah, but I've had to articulate what I mean by that. And it's this. When you defend, a lot of people defend the leader and they think they're doing the right thing. But when you defend your leader, you're bringing your leader down to the level of your people.
Right.
Oh, you got to understand, he's got a deaf ear. He can't hear very good. You know, and so everyone goes, yeah, now I get it. See, that's brought the leader down to the follower.
Right.
That's defending.
Right.
Representing brings the follower up to the leader.
That's good.
You know.
Yeah.
Which is like, what, do you think he's just sitting at home waiting for you to call him, mate? He's busy.
Right.
You serious? What? Let me give you one clue about how his day works.
Yeah.
And so you're elevating, the follower to the leader.
It's
and
good.
I don't know why, but defending your leader always goes bad.
Yeah.
No, not always.
Yep. The moment you're defending, the moment you're explaining,
Yep.
you're losing.
Yeah.
But when you're representing,
Yeah.
you're elevating.
Yeah.
And that's what I had to do all through that 4-month, hiatus of my leader, because I found I had no end of helpers saying, gee, you're doing good.
So let's get on to the subject of you then.
Yeah.
So you moved off, you transitioned from that church.
Yes.
And what was that? Tell us that story.
Okay, so I went back to pastor what's called Liberty Christian Church.
This is the church in Logan.
This is the one that Steve Penny planted,
Yep.
that I was his associate. I went away, I'm back.
Yep.
I was then the senior pastor for 17 years. So 27 years all up. Pastor Steve, I went to work one day. I'd just come back from my annual break, sat at my desk, and it's as if the office spoke to me and said, who are you? In real time, as I'm talking to you, it said, who are you? I picked up the phone. She goes, I've got a pastor.
Sure.
You got to build your your house in a time of peace.
Yeah.
So I ring my pastor on my good days and my bad days. I never, if I have a bad week, I don't avoid him.
Yep.
And so I just picked the phone up. I rang Pastor Steve. He answered, hello. I said, Steve, I think I just got fired. He said, what do you mean? And I told him what happened. He said, we better talk. So I went to, it was 2 days before I could find a convenient time for him to go and see him. I went and saw him and told him what had happened. I said, I think my time is up. But I had two other, Paul de Jong, a great friend of our house here, and Wayne Alcorn is now the national leader of our church. They were also my apostolic covering at that time, Steve, Wayne, Paul. And so I talked to Steve and said, look, I need to ring Wayne and Paul. He was so funny. He said, do you want me to tell you what they'll say? And I thought, what do you mean? He said, we do talk, you know. So I've got the three apostolic leaders in my life, so they obviously talk about it. So anyway, long story short, I realised that was it. So I went home, told Susie, my wife, and she, of course, said, are you going to tell me? I said, I'm telling you now, babe. I said, I've only told Dad. I can ring him. He don't care. I'll say, no, Susie. She said, no, I'm running with it. So we called our children to breakfast the next day. Two of them were on my staff, my team. And we told our four children, they were aged 14 to 24, and said, look, we're going to give you 2 weeks to settle with that information. You can talk to Mum and Dad, and then we're going to tell the church.
So I think it's important to interrupt for a moment, because this was not a fledgling church.
Oh, no.
This church was one of the flagship churches in Queensland and in the nation.
And still is.
And still
more
is.
so now.
Yeah, and like you took that and grew it.
Yeah.
I mean, just facility-wise,
Correct.
I mean, multi-million-dollar building.
Correct.
Correct?
Correct.
And paid off the debt.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not like something's wrong and you're out.
Oh, no. Steve Penny was a national figure. When I took that church on, now, Steve, the church when I took it on was around 500, but see, there were no campuses in that area. No one did campuses.
Yeah.
People planted churches. So Steve had planted churches. No one planted churches within 5 hours of themselves, but Steve planted churches within 15 minutes. So he had a network of churches that today we would call campuses.
Yeah.
Because he was the father and I was the son, he cut the ties and just let them all drift off.
Yeah.
So that, I wouldn't be shackled with them. They were my brothers. I was not their father.
Yeah.
A couple swam back, so we took care of them. But we continued to plant churches. Pastor Mark, you preached in one of those churches that I
Fabulous
planted.
church, yeah.
Yeah, phenomenal. Church of Thousands.
Yeah.
So, yes, it's a significant church. But it's fair to say that when I took the church on, because when Steve asked me would I pastor the church, I said no.
Right.
He asked me 3 times over a month, and I said no, till finally he said, you haven't prayed about it. I said, no, why would I? He said, explain that to me. He gives me that look. And I said, Steve, a dog doesn't pray about being a horse. A dog prays about being a better dog. I'm not a senior pastor. And he just looked at me, as he has done all through the 50 years, you better go and pray about it. So I went and prayed about it, and instantly it came on me, as if it was my life's mission.
Right.
I remember saying to my wife, Susie, this is like I've never had another thought in my life except to do this. And yet yesterday it didn't exist.
Yeah.
So the fact that it came on that quick, I was not surprised that God spoke to me that quick.
Right.
As well.
What did you do after that?
Me personally?
Yeah.
I sat down with my state leader, who's now our national leader, Wayne Alcorn, and I told him what I was doing, that we're resigning the church. And he said, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I don't want to pastor a church. And he got that look. I said, Wayne, and I hope people listening understand, senior pastors will understand what I'm saying. I said, Wayne, this is my mistress. I mean, we don't have polygamy, but if we did, this is my wife, man.
Right.
And then I looked at my wife, Susie, and said, if Susie went to heaven, surely you wouldn't think I'd get married again in 1 month.
Right.
I said, I've been there the best part of 30 years.
Yeah.
It's Steve and Liberty. It's Liberty and Steve.
Yeah.
I've got to find out who Steve is.
Yeah.
He said, oh, wow. And he said, well, I said, I'll travel. So I itinerated for 3 years.
And so, Mark, I think that's one of the things we were talking about. It'd be good to talk about, because then you ended up taking on yet another church was it Redlands?
Yeah, a church that we had planted
Yeah.
with the very first convert we ever had at Liberty.
And a couple of things I want to do. I'll make sure we talk about that
Sure.
journey. I want to talk about, I looked at the list of credentialed ministers within the Australian Christian churches.
Our movement, yeah.
That you personally,
Sure.
under your leadership and ministry over that tenure,
Sure.
are ordained ministers. I think it's like 12?
Oh, there's many, many more than 12. I think there's 10 that are pastoring churches or significant ministries.
Yeah. I mean, incredible. So you have been a father to many people, and you traveled for a bit, and you did a great job in those times
Sure.
traveling. You could come alongside senior pastors because you knew the role
Sure.
of a senior pastor. You could talk to churches, pastors, staff, and teams in a way that very few people, just a traveling person, doesn't understand.
Sure.
They blow in, blow up, and blow out. And I'm not disrespecting
Sure.
traveling. I've
Yeah.
done the travel
Yeah.
myself, and I love that season of my life. I'm just glad I don't do that anymore. Although you took on a church, you were there for how many years?
12 years.
12 years.
12 years.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, I was there for 8, then 4.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's-
Because you had to transition that to start with. You took it on, and the culture wasn't quite what you were looking for.
Yeah, yeah. Look,
Like any church,
I'm not going
any
to shoot the bride of Christ, nor...
Well, everything's got to change.
Yes, I think when you take
New
on
leaders.
a church, you got to be prepared to finish. Like the last pastor's tenure is a book, but he doesn't get to write his last chapter.
Yeah.
And I've seen too many people come in and sully the whole book in the chapter. It's almost like they've got to look good by making that look bad.
Yeah.
So I'm very careful for that.
Yeah.
The fellow
Yeah,
I
that's
took
what I
over
mean.
from was a very dear friend. He was our first convert at Liberty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he pastored it for 20 years. But truth is, he was tired.
Yeah.
And truth is, to be blunt, his leadership was terminal, but he recognised that, and so he retired and moved on, and I took that on. So simply said, Mark, Liberty, when I took it on from Steve, given that I was a son taking over from my father, doubled in 3 years, and we were just all debt.
It's amazing.
This church, now I'm 50, I'm experienced.
Yeah. You're a seasoned.
I'm seasoned.
Yeah.
It halved in 1 year.
That obviously wasn't expected.
Now, when I say halved, it actually maintained the same size.
Right.
We baptised, 80 people the first year. It wasn't a large church, but so it stayed the same size, but at least half left.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't a surprise. I use metaphors, but look, the first church I took on was like marrying my high school sweetheart. The second church I took on was like meeting someone online. And that's crass. But I just mean, the second church was like wherever you put your treasure, your heart will follow. I felt like an adopted child in the second church. I felt like a stepfather because everyone loved the pastor. Look, if he'd been a real... I'd have had an easy job, but he was a very, very nice man.
Yeah.
Not a high leadership capacity, and that's clearly in no way to insult. Everyone has a gift. He had long arms. But so I was the stepfather, so people just left.
So you're there 10 years or 12 years. Well, first of all, 8 years. And it's time, you feel like it's time to move on again.
Correct. Well, interestingly, when I took on the first church, I went away and prayed. God said, boom. The second church, when I prayed about it, I just felt God wouldn't tell me. And I said, well, do you want me to pastor it? He said, well, do you want to pastor it? And I realised the difference with when you're 30 and when you're 50.
Yeah.
God doesn't want you to be a servant all your life.
Yes.
He wants you to be a son.
Yeah.
Very good.
And he said, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
And so then I said to him, okay, well, if I do it, can I be sure you're going to anoint me for 10 years? And I've come to realise that was a figure, that's fine, but a season is what I meant. Because I didn't feel you can just go and have a go and then, this is the bride of Christ.
Sure.
You don't play with this.
Yeah.
And so and if change, I understood I was taking over something with 20 years of leadership, you would have had that here, perhaps when you took on Wave.
Absolutely.
Everyone takes on something. And you came from the outside as I did. I knew nobody.
Yep.
We'd planted it, but we planted a church, not a campus.
Yeah.
So I understood my job pretty early in the piece was I was going to be David and a Solomon would follow.
Yeah.
Because when I took on Liberty, I'd had a David and I was Solomon.
Sure.
I recognised that.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm David. So I realised it was going to be a season, and I always wanted to raise a son because I asked them, how come I've come in? Where were the sons?
Right.
And there's the leadership capacity. So it was always my desire for that.
And then you felt like you're going to hand it on.
Yep.
You're going to hand it on into to be a campus now of another
And
large
at this
church.
point, you and I are connecting
We are connected.
very heavily.
You are very You've become clearly part of my apostolic covering, and some guys can't get out of the way of their friendship for that to happen. But
Sure.
I like when the Bible Jesus said, "I call you friends." Where's the verse there where they said you're our friend?
Yep.
Where's talk about
Well, and he also said, if you do what I tell you.
That's right.
very
right.
good.
Yeah.
Yes.
They never reciprocated.
Yeah.
And said you're our friend too.
So let's talk about that because that's what Mark's getting to, right, Mark?
that's
You
right.
want to
That's
talk
what I
about this
wanna hear.
because I want this. We got just to maybe 5-10 more minutes, and I
Okay.
want to unpack this story because I feel like this is the icing on the cake because that went south. You were going to hand over to a very prominent,
Very prominent. Big
one of the
church.
largest churches in Australia.
Correct.
One of the
And
most prominent churches.
influential communicator,
And a very, very good friend.
very good friend. And so this is all good. This is this makes total sense. And you cared about this church that it would be the bet you'd put it in its best hands.
Yeah, I realised my role was not going to be pastor forever. I had a
Yep.
season.
Got that.
And then boom. So I just came to see that it's my time to move on. This individual was 15 years younger, 10 times better. I
Sure.
just felt this is going to give the church a tremendous future. A lot of prayer went into it.
And you sold that to the church.
Oh, well,
The church embraced you. Came in
understand.
on your.
You brought God's.
That's right.
You,
Yeah, I
you
understand
were the
the
man.
term
You
self.
took them.
Oh,
you led
absolutely.
them into that.
Look, when you've been in a place 10 years, you're the king. So you have a silver bullet. So I led the church. They voted 100%,
Yeah.
or endorsed, to
Yeah.
be more correct, the leadership's decision.
Yeah.
And that was affected.
Your board was on board.
The church was on board.
Yeah.
We had an MOU in place,
Yeah.
certain things about building not being sold, smart things that individual and I came up with. Long story short, within just a few weeks, that went south in the most unbelievable way.
Yeah. Regrettable is probably the
Regrettable way, yeah.
best. Yeah. And you didn't see that.
I didn't. Well,
So
better people than me didn't see it.
No, that's my point. So let's just we're not getting into them.
No.
Correct.
But share some details. Because you're handing this church over that you
Yes.
pastored for 10 years
Correct.
to someone who not just a friend,
Correct.
one of the most powerful, significant leaders in Australia.
Yeah.
And you find out what?
I find out that things aren't as they should be. So I'm on the board. Part of the MOU was we found out a little, not enough to disqualify. So we then decided, look, if
basically, let's talk about that. There was a separation, in the marriage, of the pastor and the wife.
That's right.
You didn't know that.
I did not know that when we took it on. We had the vote, Pastor Steve, and then I flew over here to talk to you about my next
remember.
decade.
Yep.
You said to me we could talk on the phone, and I said, some conversations we need to see eyebrows moving.
Yeah.
So I came over. While I was here, I got a call. I got home, had an appointment with incoming pastor, marriage separation. This is all public.
Yeah.
This is all public,
yeah.
and no malice whatsoever. And so I met with pastor. I said, I don't need to know all the ins and outs, but I need to know that you've submitted, because I wouldn't go to a church where a pastor doesn't have a pastor.
Yep.
I need to know you've submitted to an upline, and they need to tell me you're good.
Right. because some marriages
Correct.
do. You know,
Yeah.
Correct.
there's awful stories.
Correct.
So but you're also thinking about, I've got the care and the concern of this
For
church.
sure. But I also didn't want to impeach one of the pastor.
Yeah.
If the misdemeanors on the other side. My mother was never impeached for my father's sins, and
Right.
I've always been grateful to the movement for that.
Yeah.
They credentialed her.
Good.
So we went forward, but I said, but I think I need to be on the board now.
Yeah.
And, there was a bit of hoo-ha over that, but they came to see reason that, look, what if in a few months you think, I just need to look after my family? Well, we
Right.
didn't buy into your church movement. We bought into you.
Yeah.
So you're the chair. I'm
And
just on the board for the
you're
care of our people.
On the board of the church.
Of our local-
Not his church.
No, not the
but
whole
of the church
this
that they're
local
taking
assembly.
on. Yes.
And we agreed very clearly that it would be for 1 year. Within a few weeks of that, more was unpacked. We simply said it wasn't as we were told.
Right.
So I had to step in. I had to have a board meeting without the pastor. I remember sitting down with the board members,
Right.
and I said to them, if you have another meeting like this in the rest of your life, you'll probably go to hell because this is not cool.
Right.
But I said, but you do need to know
This
that
is
I
what's
have
happening.
submitted
Yeah.
to the national leader of our churches on this,
Yeah.
to the state leader on this. I had one of my team ring the state leader so they didn't think it was just me spinning it.
Good.
And I was in constant communication with Pastor Steve,
Yeah.
and Pastor Wayne, our national president.
Yeah.
And we had to terminate that MOU.
That agreement. Now that church
Totally.
still exists.
Oh, it's a wonderful church.
So I'm talking about the other church. The,
Yes,
the church
absolutely.
that you were being a part of.
Oh, it's a wonderful church.
And ends up one of the sons in the house
Yes.
took on the church, and it's going gangbusters.
And
Great.
we sat down very clearly and eyeballed each other and said, I am committed to your friendship.
Good. And then you took back the church.
Yeah,
that
I'm
you-
preaching for him when I get back home in a few
Yeah.
weeks' time.
So it's a great story
It's a
because
good
it
story.
actually
Yeah.
isn't a good story, but it ends up redeemed.
Well, a lot of times, look, we're soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
We think we've got to know everything, but the general's not going to tell us.
Yeah.
I have come to see we were handpicked for a task.
Yeah.
I remember saying to Pastor, did the Bible ever have Benjamin correct Levi? He said, yep. I said, do you think God still does that? He said, yep. I said, I think God's doing it.
Yeah.
I think God chose champions to bring correction to.
Yeah. Now that pastor's transitioned his life moving forward
Oh, sure.
in his own way, and that's all.
And God is redeeming that too.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Beautiful story.
But what I wanted to bring out was that next transition, because
Correct.
now you've got this. Okay, church, it's me again. It's not him anymore.
That's right.
That was a very
I'm
bad
back.
day.
Yes,
Hey, I'm back.
and there was all sorts of complications
Sure,
with
sure.
that because
Yeah.
there was investments from that
Absolutely.
other church.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's
Branding.
never easy.
And it was dealt with the spirit of grace
Yeah.
on both sides of the new leadership. So I'm grateful to that. We both, when you're
But-
trying to protect the body.
But I want to get to this because
Yep.
I want to get to the church also knew that you felt that your time was up.
Yep.
And now you're back.
Yeah.
But they also know you're not the long-term future given you've
correct.
already fought. But you had to take stewardship and carry the church through that
Yeah.
awful,
Yeah.
regrettable thing that took place. And
Yeah.
yet you'd done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, as I say, better people than me were held under the spell.
Yeah. No, I got you. No, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
So now you still know there's a transition in the
Correct.
future.
Correct.
So talk about that because this is a good way to close out the story.
Okay, well, in leadership, you get a certain amount of silver bullets, but not as many as most leaders think.
Sure.
So because I'd been there 10 years, I shot that bullet, everyone said, yes, Pastor. I am clearly aware that whatever happens next has to be organic.
Right.
So within 2 years, a fellow rang who was my youth pastor back when I was at Liberty. And he got saved at Liberty. He's married to my eldest daughter. He is working for the national president and one of our key ministries. He rang me and said, God's told me I have to come down and join you. I told him what Steve Penny said to me. He said, well, I haven't got a job for you.
Yep.
All my bases are loaded.
Yeah.
We were skinny right there. He said, he said, well, I guess I'm going to have to get a job because I know God told me to come. So
That's what you want.
That's what you're
big,
looking
eh?
for, isn't
He
it?
resigned his full-time position as a campus pastor of hundreds.
Yep.
Came and took a job
Yep.
and served. I knew from the get-go, probably like Steve Penny knew, but I couldn't say.
No, you couldn't tell him.
No.
But within 18 months, I told him, look, I think you're the guy. And I'd always wanted to hand on to a son.
But he had to earn.
Oh, yeah.
There's a different. There's nothing wrong with being able. The baseball analogy. Nothing wrong with being put on third base.
Sure.
If you can hit a
If
triple.
you can hit it.
That's
So you don't just put. They've got to earn that. So him coming, getting a job,
Yeah.
serving you faithfully. He was. It's like there's people have got to be singing about you.
Yeah.
Like some people say, I'm a leader, use me.
Yeah.
But I always go, there was no one singing about you. The
Right.
Bible says they said of Saul,
Yeah.
Correct.
Saul has killed thousands,
Yeah.
and they sung, David has killed tens of
Yeah.
thousands.
Yeah.
No one's singing.
Yeah.
So it was giving him a chance for people to see what he was doing.
Yeah.
He was sacrificing, serving.
Correct.
And there was a
Correct.
song being sung. And you were waiting for the song. I'm putting words in your
Oh,
mouth.
no, you're right, Steve, because I said to him, I was that blunt with him.
Yeah.
I said, look, I shot my silver bullet last time.
Yeah.
I get another one back in a few years.
And this guy's married to your daughter.
This guy's married and got saved in our
And
our
what a
ministry.
great team they are together, by the
Yeah.
way.
Brilliant.
This is Grant and
Yeah.
Becky we're talking
Correct.
about.
So I said, look, it's got to be organic. To be short of it, it got to a point where I came over here and spent 8 weeks
Yep.
in the States,
Yep.
which you don't do when you're pastoring.
No.
But in my heart, I thought, look, if I get back after 8 weeks and the church says, oh, praise the Lord, you're back,
Right.
he would have been looking for a job.
Sure. Yeah.
But my hope was that when I got back, they'd say,
They're
who
singing.
are you?
They're singing.
They're singing.
And-
And they were.
And that's the thing I want to talk about there just for a moment because I love it because in that as well, Grant was ringing me
Correct.
going, how do I help steward the transition,
Yep.
to take on this church?
Correct.
And what I loved about Grant is he learnt from you something. He obviously knew, you and I
Yep.
are not just friends,
Yep.
but he understands in that regard. You see me as someone that carries great weight and influence, and that's what you've given me.
Well,
on my
I've always exposed my guys coming up to my apostolic covering.
So Grant came. I said, "Well, give me what your thoughts are. What do you think that?" And he came and he sent me it. I went, "Hey, buddy, see this one and this one? That's great, but that you don't decide the time.
Yep.
Steve does." And he listened.
Yep.
And I think that's the thing I want to just mark.
Tremendous
just
listener.
and he really and that went so honorably, so powerfully, and the church is going gangbusters.
Yeah, I'm the
Because a lot of transitions do not.
No.
Because of a lot of that.
Well, that's why I want to talk. That's why we're having this, hey? Because they honestly, Steve, they don't go well.
No, and I think you're doing, to go back to something Steve Penny said, to be a good teacher, you do need a good student.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in our case, those two things have collided. I still chair the board. There's a sunset on that.
Yep.
But because of campus ministry, we've got fellows now that are 45, my son-in-law. He's been 15 years in full-time ministry.
Yeah.
But he'd never seen a P&L.
Yeah.
He'd never seen a balance sheet.
Right.
He'd never seen a policy document.
Wow.
Because he's in a campus ministry.
Right.
Yep.
Whereas if he'd been in a church of 500, he'd have been on the board.
Gotcha.
I was 22 years old.
Yep.
And I knew I didn't know anything,
Yeah.
but I was the cabin boy listening to the admirals.
And he's still wanting you
yeah.
to be on the board. Now he's the leader. There's no question who the senior pastor
Make
is.
no bones about it. I think for this to work, the chair, I've said to him plainly, I used to bring vision to the meeting. Look at me, Grant. I don't now.
Yeah.
I am the chair. You are the fountain of vision.
Right.
I never disagree with him in the room. I've made a commitment. I meet him a week before every board meeting and go through his agenda.
Good.
And that's where we sort stuff out. So in
Yeah.
the room, I'm his man.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of senior pastors could be the chair. And I'm not patting me on the back, but I'm simply saying
But
they don't
it's
think
a
what
unique
they
situation.
need to do.
But the wisdom behind it, the
Yeah.
stewardship behind it,
Sure.
and the history
Sure.
of the other potential,
Sure.
landmine
Necessitated it.
was and it just made the church, and that's what you wanted
Very
to
good.
do was make the church feel safe,
Yeah.
and secure. So I
And
don't recommend that a lot, by
no.
the way. I actually want to go on record.
Correct.
That's not,
Correct.
necessarily always the best thing to do. But, there's no one way of doing anything.
Sure, and I didn't drive that. That was my apostolic covering.
Yeah, that's right.
In consultation with
Yeah.
all of us. And the church now is doing what Liberty did when I took it on.
Yeah.
So I was the son taking over from my father, and it doubled in.
Yeah.
Well, we're seeing Champions Church now doing exactly
Yeah.
what.
And you know what I love about this whole story is that you're not just sitting at home twiddling your thumbs, trying and pining away for the church. You've handed that.
Yep.
You're giving leadership into that. But more importantly, you've got fresh vision over your life. You're doing a whole lot of stuff in rural areas of the state of Queensland in Australia with churches that rarely
Yeah.
get a pastor out there to come and help them.
Yep.
You're going out there to help them.
Yeah, I give 3 months of my time now to go to what's called the Outback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then from there, you're also preaching around and helping churches
And because
all
he's
around the
senior
world.
pastor, like when he comes to the States here, he'll come for 6 weeks.
That's right.
And he's a great blessing to Wave. He's
He
a great
is.
blessing to our collective.
That's right.
And and he understands. And so one of the things I want to just maybe close this out with is you are doing great mission work in the outback of Australia.
Correct, yeah.
You are just recently you traveled 4,000 miles in a week.
I did 4,000 miles in the month of February.
And there's in the
On my
month,
motorcycle.
in a month, and it's like 100 churches out in the outback,
Right.
and just
That's
enough.
in my state.
Yeah, in your state.
Yeah.
Texas fits in my state 2.5 times.
100 churches in the outback, and 92 of those pastors of those churches are not
They are
salaried
not
full-time.
remunerated from their church.
They actually have their own jobs, farmers,
Correct.
whatever they
Correct.
do. And you go out to visit them on a motorcycle, and we, Wave, support you missionally. And I know
And
I would
I'm
love for
grateful.
others
Yeah.
to do the same, because if you're looking for something
Yeah.
to support and help caring about pastors, that's what I love about the role you have.
Yeah.
You've been a great friend to us. You've helped our team with leadership
Yeah.
and team. So, Steve, thank you.
Thank you.
Mark, anything else?
Oh, I think we're done for the day, but there's so many great lessons that we've learned
Yeah.
in this. Like this story, what is so good, like it could not have been easy when that transition went all in the wrong direction. And yet you've stayed faithful, you've kept a great spirit, you've kept a great heart, you don't hold bitterness or grudges, and you can see the hand of the Lord just blessing the work of his hands through you. And that's what I think is fantastic, Steve. I get excited about that. And so for all our listeners at home, if you can get a hold of Steve, that'd be fantastic if you wanted to have him in
That's
your
kind.
church or
Thank you.
whatever.
Yeah.
But more importantly, the lessons we've learnt today, if we start applying them, I think we'll do amazing.
Big shout out to my wife Susie, though. She's an equal partner in everything I've done.
Amen. Well, thank you for joining with us today. Make sure you tune in every month for our in-depth conversations with Pastor Steve on Leading Church. Make sure you give us a like and tell your friends about us, because we would love to help them step up into everything God has for them.